Hello, everyone in the audience. We're using Zoom webinar today, so table settings, of course, you can fire questions in real time as you want in the Q&A, and we'll get to them, as soon as we can. Usually interleave them as we're talking. I'm Sunir, President of the Cloud Software Association and CEO of AppMind. I am here as your host of SaaS Connect One-on-One. It's a conversation between partnership leaders talking about what is a central problem in partnerships. I'm very happy to invite Brian Jambor from Sendoso and Adrienne Coburn from Shopify. Thank you for coming here.
Thanks, Sunir. Appreciate it.
So we're talking today about one of the central problems that we all face. How do you get your CEO to invest more in partnerships? Both Brian and Adrienne have spent a long career in partnerships. They've started partnership teams from zero, convincing the organizations to invest in themselves and then later on grow their team. And they have both quite interesting and differing stories. The question is, of course, do you lead with revenue or do you lead with your ecosystem strategy? And they're here to tell your stories and compare, contrast, see what worked, what didn't, and what we can learn from each other. So with that, I'm gonna kick it off to them to introduce themselves and their own backgrounds. I'll start with you, Brian, and then go to Adrienne.
Sure. So head of partnerships over at Sendoso, spent the last close to decade working partnerships. But prior to Sendoso, I was at a company called web.com, where I managed product partnerships across 3 different divisions. And then prior to that, I was at Yodel, where we spun up a reseller program. And then prior to that, I was at Keep, formerly known as Infusionsoft, where we had affiliates, referral partners, certified partners as well. Spent the last several years and several cycles spinning up partner programs from the ground up at most of the companies that I previously named. Great to be on and sure to appreciate it.
And I'm Adrienne Coburn. So I'm currently at Shopify. I work with all of our service and agency partners building out that program. Previous to that, about 6 months ago, and 3 years prior to that, I was at Uberflip. So Uberflip's a marketing technology that works in the B2B space. So they're kind of figuring out what partnerships meant, but ended up really working heavily with their service and agency partners there as well. Before that, I was in a different industry, more travel and tourism, also in partnerships, which interestingly enough, actually has a lot of commonalities, just very different outcomes.
That's great. So the interesting thing about, I've talked to them both, is that they both had to start partnership teams. Brian at Sendoso has a great story about how he had to set a partnership team up, starting with revenue. And Adrienne had to start a partnership team at Uberflip, and that was a different strategy over there. So I'm going to start with Brian because I think a lot of us feel like the only way to make any headway in SaaS is to have a revenue story, and that was Brian's story. So Brian, why don't you kick it off? Tell us about your partnership program you set up at Sendoso.
Sure. So at Sendoso, for those of you that don't know, Sendoso is a sending platform. It allows you to send personalized gifts, branded swag, e-gifts, a bunch of different multiple touch points, if you will, at scale to help you drive additional revenue and opportunities for your team and wow your customers. We kind of looked at the space that we were in. Sendoso plays in the account-based marketing space, and it looked like there was sizable opportunity to have prospective partners refer their clients over to us where we could generate these experiences for their customers. And so the top line was it could look like a moderate revenue play in terms of building up an arm of, call it, referral partners that would refer clients to us. So that was the initial mandate, I'll say, of the million different objectives that a partner program can have. lots of different reasons for spinning up a partner program. Our executive team's primary reason going into it was revenue.
Fair enough. And so Adrienne, what was the story at Uberflip?
So the initial story at Uberflip actually started out quite similarly, the revenue play, really being able to focus primarily on the agencies that would be bringing us more into the MarTech space, referring our products. What we realized very quickly, though, is that the motivation for these agencies to bring us those customers was not what it needed to be in order to make it actually a holistic program. So we did quickly pivot to more of a services play, bringing in our partners to not only build that revenue stream, but really concentrate on allow Uberflip to be the technology and have other folks come in to really concentrate on how to make it a live product and focus on the services.
Well, actually leads to a really good question. Like, so could you paint some color? Like, what would be a typical one of these agencies, and really what was motivating?
Yeah. So this changed over time. Depended, who we were targeting as a customer. Really depended what kind of partners we were working with. But at that beginning stages, and still remain consistent throughout, they really ended up being marketing service providers. So people who are working with customers to bring them that holistic strategy from the consulting and strategy perspective, all the way to execution of things like their MarTech stack. So these partners would be working heavily with other marketing technologies, sometimes Sendoso or other companies of the like, to really make that full strategy for the customers they are working with, mostly in the enterprise B2B space. So the motivation for these partners, what we realized is like, they didn't care about a little revenue that we were going to give them for that referral commission. That was not at all what was going to motivate them. For them, it was twofold. It was creating services revenue. So really being able for them to create this whole arm for their business to create this whole new path of revenue in the services light that they were already doing. And then the second piece is market expansion. So getting into new customer bases that weren't available to them without a technology like Uberflip.
Yeah, that's perfect. And so that's different than what you experienced, Brian. Like most people probably don't understand the market that you're in. Can you tell a little bit more about who these distributors were, maybe what kind of companies they were, maybe some names I don't know, and then what were motivating them and how did you fit in?
Yeah, absolutely. I can do that. If you don't mind, I have a quick question for Adrienne, though, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I found that when I was at Yodel is we tried to spin up a reseller program, and we didn't have a product that would lend itself well to a substantial service model for our resellers. And so what we found was resellers weren't as engaged or motivated to actually participate in our program because there wasn't that long tail service revenue they could gain from it. And one of the lessons learned in that experience was we didn't pivot fast enough from a, call it traditional reseller / certified partner program to more of a referral based, program or spinning up some sort of services, things along those lines. So what I was wondering, Adrienne, is how long did Uberflip spend working through that, call it reseller model, before there was a realization that there was the need to pivot to more of a service-based focus? Because that's one of the challenges I think that a lot of partner leaders face is they're concerned to make that shift due to the sizable sunk cost of the previous strategy, even though that may be the right decision to make.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, I'm not there anymore, so I can't say this authority, but I'm fairly certain they're still having these conversations. This is not a done deal. This is a continually evolving, I see Jillian in the chat over there. It's a continually evolving thing. It's like, this is not something you can have a strategy and stick with. So I think just to point that out, when I left, it wasn't a perfectly packaged service program. But I think the need and the motivation was an understanding that could continue to be built on throughout time. So the other thing to point out, we really didn't consider our partners resellers. What we considered them was marketing service providers or even value-added referral partners. Not all platforms are meant to be resold. Some are too complex. Some of them have a lot of other aspects that need to be considered. Selling into the enterprise place, it's not an easy transaction. So we didn't want to give that control away. It was something we really wanted to own, especially as we were a growing business. So really what we were doing was working alongside our partners on the services arm. The other thing to consider is there's two types of services these people can provide. One is a platform-specific kind of launched package. It's directly applicable to the platform itself. And the second is ancillary services. Not maybe at Yodel, they wouldn't like launch the platform or work specifically in the platform, but I would absolutely bet there's some sort of strategy consulting ancillary service that the partners could offer in tandem with the platform.
Yeah, and that was at Yodel. That was the hardest problem because it was such simple software that the consulting was nearly non-existent, right? It was so simple to set up and utilize. It wasn't complex. So one of the things that we recognize at Sendoso is when we kind of looked at our market, and we recognized that account-based marketing is a place where we fit in terms of companies that are doing account-based marketing or account-based everything, tend to need a direct mail strategy to supplement those activities, and so they use Sendoso. But in that, we initially started going after mid-market and enterprise account-based marketing agencies, so agencies that consult in ABM. And one of the things we found through that initial strategy was we became one of many arrows in the agency's quiver that they could utilize with a client. But there wasn't enough tight affinity in terms of service, right, or products or things that they could offer to our customers that made that relationship more valuable than any other relationship they had with any other SaaS company. And so we started to explore additional aspects of the market, and we recognized that there were a sizable amount, $22 billion worth of promotional product distributors in North America. And so when we started looking at that TAM, and we recognized that the top 40 distributors make up, 80+% of that $22 billion in revenue, we said, okay, this seems like that could be a really good market for us to kind of get into as far as partnerships are concerned. So now we partner with companies like Staples Promotional Products, or major distributors, Brian Via, Jack Nadell International. These are companies that have relationships with suppliers in China, place the order for the swag, and then drop ship it wherever you want them to. In our case, they drop ship it to one of our warehouses where we intake it, inventory it for the customer, and then the customer can one-off send that out through their CRM or marketing automation program, and then get a feedback loop of ROI on that spend, which was a big gap for that industry because they don't have the ROI component of their offering in terms of how companies are justifying the promotional product spend that they're essentially laying out to their customers, prospects, employees, etc. So as soon as we made that shift, which took around 7 months for us to go from these kind of mid-market ABM marketing agencies to promo product distributors, there's a sizable difference in not only the quality of accounts that we were being referred, but the quantity of accounts we were being referred by that partner base. So it was a very critical pivot for us in terms of our partner evolution.
For most of your opportunities coming from these distributors end up being agencies, or were they a mix of agencies and end customers as well?
The bulk of the distributors are referring end customers. It's very rare that a distributor will refer an agency because many of them offer agency-like services. So they have a design team and things along those lines.
So making that pivot, I'd venture to guess that those partners that you had initially sought out, those more B2B agencies, were still interested, and there's a reason why they went to you in the first place. How did you make that pivot with them, and what kind of balance did you strike out to go through with both initiatives?
Yeah, so we went from a one-to-one support model to a one-to-many support model from a partner account management standpoint. So we started to take our promo product companies, and we would have one-on-one QBRs and conversations with them and a partner account manager. And then we kind of would aggregate the communication for the ABM agencies along with the support, right? And so it's the way that we've been able to scale it and accommodate both groups, while both valuable in our ecosystem, of course. There's one that just has a little bit tighter affinity to what we're doing than the other.
There's a question from Jeff Matan, who along these lines, but I kind of want to change a little bit to meet these different circumstances. So his question is, I understand his context because I've talked to him, but he says, your competitors have years of experience building partner programs. You're likely the first partnership person in your company. These other companies have been building partner programs or focusing on the partner's growth because they realize they sell their own stuff. They're selling their own services. After all, your partner doesn't care about you. This is a fundamental principle of partnerships. They care about their own sales. Like, they want the customer themselves. So what was the first 3 things you did to establish a beachhead. But because you have different contexts, it'd be kind of interesting to split, because you did agencies, but put that aside on the Sendoso side, what these disty platforms wanted from you. And Adrienne, the same thing, as you changed to agencies, it sounded like you had to do a lot of learning there. It wasn't like a 1, 2, 3 off the top of your head. It sounded like it took some time to get there. So I mean, actually, I'll start with Adrienne, because I think for Jeff, in his case, it's probably more relevant. So what did it take for you to find the first 3 things that really mattered?
Sure. Can you define a beachhead for me?
I think he means getting any traction with the agencies. So you need to start a fire, at least an ember, have a partner program, right? So getting your first agency, as everyone knows who started marketing with marketing agencies, getting your first marketing agency to work on your platform can be difficult. So, so what did you ended up finding worked?
Sure. I think biggest one, lowest barrier to entry possible. So a lot of programs you'll see out there, there's a cost to join or a cost to be trained, or those elements, and then sometimes that's very valid. But I'd say when you're first getting started, you need to make it easy, and you almost need to invest more in them than they are in you. So we put a lot of effort into getting these people trained and proficient in our platform, being the experts, being kind of that extension of our team. There's a lot of work that has to be done there. So you do have to make an investment in that. So yeah, keeping barriers entry low and being okay to make that upfront investment is definitely a big one. Second, just like finding out what their motivators are. Maybe you have a product that actually can be resold quite easily, so they can do a big volume play, and all they need to do is sell 100 copies of your platform, and that'll be enough revenue for them. Maybe that's adequate. So finding out those motivators early on is going to be really, really helpful. And I guess third is just like matching those motivators with your internal motivators. So really having to balance CEO expectations of what your program is going to bring in. So like, what gaps can our partners fill, and make sure that those motivators match with the partner. So it's like, it has to be a win-win. It can't be, this is what our company needs, but no partner is going to get any value from it. And it can't be the value only coming from the partner, nothing to your organization. And so just finding those gaps in your internal organization and making sure they meet the motivators of the partners that you're working with.
Very awesome. And then Brian, like, what did you find that these disty platforms, because these are not, they have agency services, but they're offering more of and you're muted, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah. So the goal of these distributors is to sell more swag, distribute more swag. And so we do several things to promote them across our customer base and generate opportunities for them. We mark them as the distributor of record for anybody that they bring to us. We have a partner directory that we feature them in, and then we provide them with opportunities to get in front of our teams, right, in a narrow basis. What's interesting when you're starting to build let's say you're building to answer Jeff's question, if you're building a program and you're going up against a company that has a very mature partner structure to it, partner ecosystem to it, right, or partner programs to it, the benefit that you have is flexibility. The larger your programs get, the more, Adrienne and I were talking about this the other day, the more black and white you have to be in terms of the enablement that you offer to your partners, the reciprocity, the reciprocity that you can provide, things along those lines. When you're small, you can oftentimes get the resources to do that for a handful of partners fairly quickly. And so lean heavily into that. They may not be getting the resources that they want from their current relationship because that current relationship is too big, or that specific partner is not big enough or not strategic enough, or the case may be. So you do have some advantages there. I would lean heavily into that and create that a la carte list of reciprocity that you can then double down on with those partners as you start to kind of build out that structure.
Actually, Jamie Fucillo from Mindbody has a good question about this. This is something that comes up a lot. One of the challenges, this is for Adrienne, but I think both of you could answer this. One of the challenges we all experience is that partners want visibility and access to our large customer base. How do you scale the visibility of these agency partners to your customers without spamming your customers?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's a hard one to manage. I'll give two-pronged answer on that one because it's very different to Brian's earlier point, depending on the scale of your program. So at Uberflip, it was an answer. At Shopify, it's a much different answer because of the scale of the amount of partners we have. So at Uberflip, it was small and mighty. The amount of partners we had was not unscalable to be able to go out and actually introduce them to customers. That paired with the fact that it was a very hands-on sale. So I was extremely integrated into the sales team, as were our partners. So that kind of one-to-one interaction where I'd be directly introducing a partner to a sales rep to work on an account, to be able to embed their services in from the get-go, that was a lot easier to do because of that scaled down nature of it. Where it becomes a bit more challenging is at a place like Shopify, where there are thousands of partners and thousands of customers, where it's not such a hands-on sale, where it's harder to do that kind of one-to-one integration. So that's when you really have to Brian's earlier point, look at the black and white. Like, this is what we can promise you when you are a certain level. Once you give X back to our company, we can give Y back to you. So really being able to have that kind of tiering system and different levels, promises, benefits, like gives and gets carved out from the get-go is going to be extremely helpful for promising and not over-promising to your partners. So some different tangible things you could look at. Partner directories are awesome. That's, the biggest kind of scalable thing you could do. All of our events, we made sure our partners were very, very invested in, both from a hosting and speaking, running their own workshops off the side of the event, being able to get involved with our lead list. That type of thing is going to be extremely important as well. And just making really sure and clear to them that it's their job as partners to develop their own business development strategies. They can't rely only on you for that kind of lead execution. They have to have their own biz dev strategies to be able to address your market as well. So yeah, two things there: making sure it's black and white, clear from the beginning what the gives and the gets are, and second, making it really clear up front that the responsibility can't be entirely on you to get involved in the ecosystem.
You know who does a really good job of that, in my opinion, is Salesforce. Salesforce has a huge, huge partner ecosystem. And they just relatively recently, rolled out a point-based system based on a multitude of different activities that you have to go through in order to get additional reciprocity from them from a marketing standpoint, for their customers, or preferred placement in the app exchange, et cetera. So it spans from how many people do you have in your organization that are certified in the platform, to what kind of marketing have you done to promote Salesforce, how much revenue you're driving to them, et cetera. To your point, Adrienne, one of the things that I found is sometimes if you put a moderate to high dollar amount to that opportunity to get in front of customers, you can do your team a substantial service by helping them kind of weed through those requests, right? If you have a lot of, small and mid-market marketing agencies and you say, yep, here's the criteria. On top of that, it's a $10,000 investment. Usually you'll weed out the majority of them that wouldn't want to take that serious anyway. And so it actually helps your teams a lot. It's an easier conversation to have than them to say, I don't know, let me check, let me see who I know that, a friend of a friend, maybe I can squeak this in.
There's an interesting contrast in what you're saying. Not like I don't have opinions about this, which I do, but here's the contrast. So at the beginning, Adrienne said, don't do that. Don't put prices on your partnership program. And then at the end, you're saying do. So what point does the, bronze, silver, gold tiering system make sense? Of course, Salesforce, they're the second biggest B2B SaaS company on the planet. They can do anything they want. And Shopify is no slouch either. I was just talking to someone there. There's one partnership person for every $1 billion of market cap at Shopify, apparently. So there's 100 partnership people there. It's pretty good. Pretty good team. Yeah. You have resources. But for a smaller company or someone who's starting out, at what point do you flip it over to pay to play?
How big is the need for your organization? Uberflip, the need for services was huge. We were losing money by not investing in it through our partner ecosystem. We couldn't scale it out though as fast as it needed to be scaled out. For us, it was like a business critical decision to be able to find a way to fill that gap. If you have the luxury of having you have some leverage there, partners are asking you to be involved, they're trying to get involved for their own gain more than your gain, then I think that's where you can be a bit more picky about the barrier to entry. And at a certain point, yes, you need to make that barrier to entry higher if you're investing a lot in them. If you're not investing a lot in them though, if it's automated programming, if it's not one-to-one partner relationships and partner managed relationships, then you can add a cost on it or not. And I think you have a lot more flexibility when that scale comes in.
The questions are more interesting than our agreed script. We'll just go off-roading to the Q&A if that's all right,
Right.
guys.
Let's
do that. All right. So here's one from Robin Yerix. So do either of your companies have significant integrations? Because we've been talking about agencies, but actually your disty relationship is more of an integration-y kind of experience, resell, because it's like a platform play. But I think it applies to bringing in an ecosystem of software partnerships. Do you have significant integrations, and did your service partner program include SIs, system integrators, integration services? Oh, it's interesting. So did you end up using agencies to deliver part of your integration solution? So starting with you, Adrienne.
Yes, definitely. I think having that as an aspect of what any technology platform needs some version of that, whether it's so a good example is Sendoso and Uberflip together are technology partners. We don't actually, to my knowledge, have an integration together, or maybe we do now. We don't know when I left. But in theory, there's a lot of strategy that needs to go in about how you use the technologies together in a full stack of marketing. So you need two types of partners and services partners for that kind of thing. One is the physical integration for people who literally need that API connector. And then the second is more of a strategy consulting approach to it, where it's looking at it at the big picture.
Yeah, Keep did that really well early on, in my opinion. So they had a whole program of what they called developer partners, and you could get there was a test that was involved to make sure that you understood not only the platform, but you understood the API, you understood the ecosystem in terms of the different integrations that were available. And then you were tested on your proficiency with the API in order to get certified as a certified Keep developer, if you will. And then those developers were ones that when clients said, hey, I want to integrate Keep with XYZ software, internal customer success teams would point them to those specific partners and say, here's a list of integrators that we know that we've certified that could do that for you. We recommend these 2 or 3, and then here's their contact information. You can do some diligence, go with who you want. That ended up working out really well.
That's awesome. Do you know how they actually went about certifying those people? It's a really hard thing to certify on.
Yeah, it really is. So we had a developer that was running the program as a developer partner manager that had a lot of development/engineering experience. And he created a test based on our API that through an LMS that would say, okay, if you're trying to query XYZ, which endpoint in the API would you use? And so you'd have to choose it multiple choice. And occasionally there would be a box to essentially divulge, okay, here's the reason why. So that was kind of the first step of that test. The second step of that test is we gave them a sandbox Keep account.
He's frozen for you too.
Yeah, maybe they stopped the connection at the internet at the border. For both in Canada, for anyone's listening. Oh dear. Well, I have a question for you then, from where was it? From Nick Thomas. How long did it take you to start driving real revenue from your agencies? Well, that's an interesting question, because we're talking about now service gaps, and then this is part of the interesting story. So you didn't start off with a revenue story. So what happened? How did your agency program progress? Did it ever end up making dollars and cents?
It definitely makes dollars and cents, but it's probably not as scalable as initially they had set out for it to be. Like a CEO's dreams of what a partner program can do. You see like that hockey stick approach of like just absolutely generating revenue left, right, and center. And I think the reality is it's a slow burn. So yes, it did start generating revenue, but I think that to have that really, really scalable approach where you have a whole ecosystem in itself depends heavily on how much you're investing into it. If you're bootstrapping, get ready for a couple deals a year. But if you're going further than that, then I think that's when you can get a bit more, of a full blown strategy out of it. So years, definite years. where, once again, going back to the question of scale versus small, it's like, if you're getting it to a point like what Shopify has, where you have an army of partners out there on your behalf, then you're going to have a revenue stream that's really, really consistent and does have that hockey stick approach. But yeah, to get to that point, it's years of investment. So where we started to see pickup is when partners started making revenue off the services. It became an integrated part of their business. They were an absolute Uberflip partner at that point, and so had that invested interest in our company, where before they could have taken any platform and plugged it in for what we were doing.
Yeah, I give a shout out to my friend Alex Glenn at partnerprograms.io. This is like his church of Alex Glenn, is because he's talking from the marketing agency side, is that's actually turns out to be when the things flip over, when they start seeing when they make their own revenue and you can prove it to them. And and shout out to my besties, Microsoft and Salesforce, because they actually do this more aggressively. Microsoft has been tracking dollars of revenue of their service partner for every dollar Microsoft's made since 2010 in the IDC report. And Salesforce is now tracking that. They're doing so Microsoft is $9 of their partners making $9 over $1 they make. So that's $1 trillion ecosystem. Wow. And which is half of the entire like software partnership ecosystem, which is $2.3 trillion. And then the Salesforce is doing $4.50 roughly, according to Forrester, I think, or IDC. So, amazing. I mean, this is an interesting number. Did you ever end up like interviewing and finding out how much money they were making and turning that into case studies at Uberflip?
Not in a way that I could speak to, over beers. I heard some numbers, but nothing that we really substantially looked at. Brian, I'm so glad we can see your actual background now. I thought for sure those photos were definitely on the wall.
Have to thank my marketing team for their fabulous design. Now you know why I'm so sharp, right? Oh, dear. My internet died. Sorry about that. We were just talking about this right before the call, about how we've all had kind of experiences. But anyway, appreciate.
I just dropped my phone off the call too. I'm hoping that my Wi-Fi stays up, but we'll see.
There you go.
All right, Stephen Larson has a question. Back to the point. So, why invest in partnerships to build ecosystems? How do you sell the value of an ecosystem beyond generating leads and gross revenue? And what KPIs do you recommend? Well, I'm going to put this to you, Brian, because this is right in the hot seat for what happened to your partner program. So you start with revenue. What happened there?
Yeah, we started with revenue, and as we progressed, we kind of realized that we could build a sizable moat if we turn that into an ecosystem. And so we started to kind of figure out, okay, well, what would that ecosystem look like? Part of it is integrations. Part of it were these distributors. And then the other part that was really interesting was we call them merchant partners, the perishable goods, cookies, cupcakes, brownies companies that people are able to send through our platform. And we were able to actually start getting exclusives with those companies to be on our network. And so now we have close to 200 partners between distributors, promo product distributors that are recommending us to their clients, between the perishable good companies that we also get recommendations from them for their corporate clients that want to place orders through like a Salesforce or Marketo and get that to ROI visibility as opposed to through them directly. And then, of course, the integrations. And so it ended up, call it somewhere between the 9 to 14 month mark, transforming from what I would call traditional revenue only driven, partner program to a very holistic ecosystem. How do we build a moat around our organization through partners?
Well, one of the interesting things you said in the story, which I didn't get when we did the pre-interview, is that you got to the disties by actually talking to your agency partners. So you kind of like flew through the ecosystem to even find these relationships. Is that right? Is that what happened?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So we go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, so we had an agency partner that essentially kind of explained to us the ecosystem that we were in, which was kind of interesting. You think you have a grasp on the industry, and then you have somebody that you talk to that's been in the industry for 20 years, and they say, no, it's not like that. It's like this. You say, oh, that's interesting. So this particular individual ended up introducing us to, this distributor network that we candidly didn't know really existed, at least the scope of it, that existed. I mean, there's 20,000 of these distributors in North America. Again, 20 plus $1 billion a year in revenue between all of them. And so we actually went to the distributor conference. There's an industry trade association and all sorts of other things around this whole distributor ecosystem. And so we're starting to get really involved in that. But yeah, it was through one of our agency partners that gave us a little more intel than we had previously.
So then tell me. Well, this is like part of the core story. What happened next? How you brought this idea and formulated. You had to bring it up to the board, right, or the investors? Like, who did you bring it up to get invested?
Yeah, so we had multiple conversations with the executive team and the board. So we were going through we were still very early in our partner program. Right? I was the first dedicated hire with partner program experience at Sendoso that we brought on, right? And so there were still a lot of things to figure out, but there was such a drive to go after ABN agencies that we had to do a lot of diligence around what the total addressable market was in these distributors, what kind of logos they were actually courting in terms of their customer base, and really paint the picture of what the opportunity was. And could we do it at scale where there are enough of them where it made sense? And so we had to do a lot of diligence on that end, and then present that to the board and the executive team to get buy-in to say, yep, that sounds like the right direction. Let's make the pivot. Let's have you guys go after them aggressively. And we've been doing that since. It's been very beneficial.
So where were the KPIs that you promised them? Like, what were you tracking? How did you explain it to them in a way that they could understand it?
Yeah, so what we looked at is the total addressable market that industry was generating, right? And then we started looking at the top 40 distributors that we knew that we could pick off. That we had some preliminary conversations with the agency that I mentioned to you previously, knew people of those organizations and made some introductions to us. And so we committed to procuring several of those specific partners. So that was the deliverable. Could you get a handful of these top 40 distributors in your ecosystem? And then from there, it was setting realistic expectations around, okay, we're going to be tracking the leading indicators of we call them partner qualified leads, which are referrals from those organizations, and then partner influence leads, which are referrals from those organizations that are already in our pipeline, right? And as we track that, we committed to modeling that out over the course of a 6-month period, and then reassessing at the end of 6 months. So we didn't commit to revenue because we didn't know how those leads would convert into pipeline, how long it would take those partners to onboard. Of the partners that we inked, sometimes a top 40 distributor looks great on paper, but you'll find a partner that produces way more value for you that's doing significantly less, right? And those are just a lot of things you don't know until you're actually in the weeds and have a little more maturity in that strategy. So those are the KPIs. Again, PQLs, we call them PILs, partner influence leads, right? And then we track that against new revenue from partners, right? And then the tertiary component was how many of those partners can we recruit on a monthly basis, right? Are we actually getting traction in that ecosystem?
You did something similar. You started off looking at sales leads, changed to a services play, and then went back to SQLs. Is that right, Adrienne?
Yeah, I would say SQLs have never been the main driver for Uberflip's partner program, but it does influence it, especially when it comes to more of the technology partner side of things. So having the right people to go to market with from a marketing perspective when you're looking at SQLs or whatever you want to call them, you need it. But I think for the intention that we wanted these partners for, it was way past SQL. They come to you at absolutely opportunity qualified, like they're moving forward very, very quickly. So it was less of a concentration on lead quantity and more on quality and how quickly they can be expedited through the sales funnel.
What were the metrics that you were tracking, like to report up? Like why was your company willing to continue building out the partner team? What are you responsible for?
Revenue, ARR. At the end of the day, I reported to at one point marketing, at one point sales and then COO and then back to sales. And, the one thing that remained consistent no matter who I was reporting to was the revenue component that was attached to my job. The rest of it changed, like whatever was the accompanying KPI changed depending where we sat in the organization, the value that we were driving. But that was the one thing at the end of the day they really cared about. So all decisions had to lead back to that. You definitely get into different territory when you start looking at different business models and different reasons for having partnerships. But yeah.
You guys are killing me. This is supposed to be a debate with your partnership people. You decided to agree with each other. You just said revenue, and Brian, you just said ecosystem. So,
well, I think most partnership people could say, like, if you're not bringing in revenue, there's not going to be a lot to hold your team there for long.
And if you don't have an ecosystem, you don't have a strategy. That's right.
Well, there you go. I will tell you, one of the most interesting experiences I've had in partnerships is when I was at web.com and I was owning product partnerships. And the KPI was not revenue at all. It was cost savings due to features that we would add into the platform from a partner that we wouldn't have to maintain in terms of existing features that we were doing ourselves. It was a very interesting time in my career when it wasn't a revenue based quota.
There he goes.
There he goes. I think we can assume what he was saying was.
Yeah. Well, one of the things
it was an outlier.
It wasn't an outlier. One of the things that I just pulled the threads together is that depending on the part of the customer funnel you guys were talking about, the business drivers for that moment in time for the customers is solved with a different set of partners. And that leads to your strategy. So for the marketing agencies, you're doing a service implementation gap where you didn't have the in-house professional services. So you use these agencies to accelerate that. And then there's a quid pro quo, which helped you grow revenue through them. But you're basically handing them first services because that's something you were unable to do. And, sounds like, and for the distributor case at Sendoso, that is like the top of the funnel tied to the functional use cases. And at web.com, that would be around the product experience or the product use case doesn't go. Does that track with your own experiences? That it really depends on what part of the customer experience and what part of the journey they're in. Your partnership strategies have changed.
Yeah, and I think it's I think it's also dependent on the stage of business that you're in, right? If you're an earlier, organization in terms of your product market fit and customer adoption, things along those lines. Revenue, a good friend of mine once told me, revenue cures all ills. Right. So if you're bringing in revenue, you get budget, right? You get resources, you get all sorts of things. It's certainly more heavily weighted on an earlier stage organization, right? That is really figuring out product market fit compared to a later stage organization that maybe has figured that out and is now, trying to figure out how to get that late majority and scale, right? And so I think there is this component of how sophisticated and what stage is your business in. And it can often have a very close impact and tie to how your partner programs need to be positioned and structured.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, the things that Shopify care about is very, very different than the things that someone like Uberflip would care about, just at the stage of their journey and the amount that they need to be integrated into the different strategies of the different players that are out there, be it technology, agencies, alliances, whatever it is. So yeah, that absolutely changes over the scale of the company.
Which does mean,
go ahead.
I was going to say, it does mean that the way that you pitch to your executive team partnerships and partner programs is going to be completely different depending on the stage that your business is in. You may believe in ecosystems 100%, but your business and your C-suite maybe just isn't there yet in terms of what the greatest need is today. And so that may force you, while you know that ecosystems is the right play, to pitch revenue, right? In terms of the primary objective of partnerships. To whereas, if that's, if it's services because you have high churn and low NPS, you need to figure some things out there, then, maybe you're pitching a little bit differently, right? But, I think a lot of it, again, goes back to the stage that your business is
I'm gonna throw this question out. It's a bit of from left field given what we've been talking about, but I think it's very relevant from Miwa, and this will be our last question. But it kind of ties it together. So do you have, the question is, do you have experience building revenue via technology partners? And if so, what successful programs did you use to streamline to generate more leads and revenue? But this is a good question because it takes the ecosystem strategy, which is that mostly tech partners are building out the whole product solution and turning into a revenue solution. And if you want to do an ecosystem strategy, means that you need to be able to pitch that knowing you have the confidence to get the revenue out of it at the end of the day. So what would you say, you have this ecosystem of partners, what would be your strategy to pull revenue out of them? I'll put it to each of you. Adrienne, I'll start with you.
Sure. I think it depends on the partner. There's kind of two different ways you can look at this. I'm sure there's a million different ways, but let's look at two different ways. One is complementary technology partners. So Uberflip and Sendoso. We are similar size, similar target market. Neither one of us is like the big brother. It's like, let's go at this together. So in that case, something like account mapping is very effective, where you can almost do a joint solution sell, where it's very, that it's equal playing ground. You can go for it. And even maybe it is getting an agency partner involved where they're the one packaging together the two technologies and bringing that forward to the market. That kind of, account mapping, getting your reps involved with each other. Even when just at a conference, like getting all the sales reps into one room so they can chat about like who they're speaking to at the conference. Hey, can you introduce me to that person? That can be very, very effective with complementary technologies. Where that changes is for big brothers. So if you're tapping into a different ecosystem, so in Uberflip's world, people like Marketo and Oracle and Salesforce, these are all people who have their own programs where you have to play by their rules. So there's absolutely a revenue component to be played there, but you, like I just said, have to play by their rules. So that could be hosting events with them. There still could be some account mapping components, but it's usually like on a isolated rep to rep basis. So being able to find one rep that's very open to that concept of kind of joint selling and doing it at a bit more of a less of a partnership level at the top, but more of a partnership level with like the amigos that are actually doing the work. So kind of two different strategies there. With the bigger guys, play into their marketing programs as much as you can. It might be more of an SQL approach with the larger ones, where it's more of a qualified opportunity with the complementary.
That's awesome. Brian, how's been your experience?
Yeah, very similar. So I will tell you that if you're not, I'll do a little shameless plug here for a company that I'm not affiliated with whatsoever, but wholly believe in what they're doing and think that they're fantastic. If you're not doing account mapping with Crossbeam, you're not doing account mapping right, candidly. Crossbeam is a great tool that we use for account mapping. Just phenomenal team over there. And we've actually been able to recognize a sizable amount of revenue from our technology partnerships where we've done account mapping, not only from a partnership to partnership person level where, hey, where are your top 10 accounts? These are mine. Can your CSM teams make intros to our AEs or whatever the case may be, but literally getting the reps involved at the rep level to where they feel comfortable reaching out to each other to get account insight. That's been critical for us. And secondarily to that, I think if you start thinking through the services strategy, right? If you have service partners that you're trying to do that at scale, there were some interesting things that Keep did. Keep was onboarding all of their customers in-house and eventually flipped the switch and then had all of their partners do all of their onboarding, right? As part of that process, there's a significant amount of savings that happened for the organization. One of the things that was deliberated, they ended up not doing, but they talked about potentially charging partners to onboard customers for that opportunity to onboard the customer. And it's another way that you can generate revenue from if you have a service-based partner organization, right? To give them that opportunity to get a new customer, right? Which is nothing more than a customer acquisition cost to the partner. Right. And then you're getting, with any luck, a little bit better service, more customer tailored response because the partner can take that time on a one-to-one basis with those individual customers, to whereas your team is trying to have to do things at scale.
I will mention one resource we have, the Cloud Software Association. We have the integrated partnership checklist that the community has put together as well. So if you're doing technical partnerships, that's like an incredible list of like every single thing you could possibly do with a partnership tech partner to get results out of it. So I will send that out into the general room later, Miwa, for you. So last thoughts. I mean, we have a couple of minutes left. It's like, it's an interesting conversation. It's very dynamic. I really appreciate you guys doing it. So thank you very much. And thank you, audience, for the questions. Those are amazing. So, we've talked, we've been talking for an hour here. You guys talked before. You had different strategies. What are your conclusions? Like, what did you learn about partnerships by talking to the other person, learning from their experience? And, Adrienne, you look like you have an answer, so I'll throw it to you.
Well, I was pondering some answers. I don't know that I have an answer. I think the biggest thing I've learned from Brian here is just like big pivots. We made pivots, and Shopify makes pivots and Uberflip makes pivots, but the approach that Sendoso made with pivoting to more of a distributed model is like a really large pivot, and being able to kind of balance, automating an entire section. When you're a company that's at a size where you can't do it all, you do have to pick where you're investing your time and money. So I think I just really appreciated learning a little bit more about how to make those decisions, and how to pivot.
And Brian, what do you conclude? What did you learn from talking to Adrienne?
Yeah, so the biggest thing I had from Adrienne, I mentioned it earlier in the session, but really about this idea that as your partnerships are fairly young, so to speak, you have the flexibility to tailor the program and tailor the reciprocity and deliverables to the partner, or if maybe not even young, if it's a very strategic partnership, you also have that same ability. But the larger your ecosystem is, the more black and white you have to be, the more intentional time you have to spend on dialing down exactly what the rules are so that you can scale. And it was a nice reminder of the different stages that partner programs are at, and the flexibility or lack thereof that can and should be offered to partners as the ecosystem kind of continues to expand and grow.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'd like to say both of you are on Slack and our CSA Slack. So if you have further questions, you can follow up with them there. I'd like to thank you again. It's really great. I really appreciate it. We'll be sharing this recording afterwards with the audience. And thank you for your questions, as well as very, very lively discussion. Great.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sunir.
Thank you, Adrienne, Sunir. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, Brian.